All right, let's begin today's session. So hi everyone, welcome to Burwood's Remote Workforce Strategy webinar series. My name is Colleen Berry. I'm the Marketing Director at Burwood Group and I'll be your host for today's session. So this is a weekly web series devoted to COVID-19, IT preparedness and support, hopefully an opportunity for you to get free strategic and technical advice about your current remote workforce IT challenges. A little bit about us. Burwood Group is an IT consulting and integration firm headquartered in Chicago with offices and employees across the U.S. And we've been helping a number of our clients with COVID-related challenges over the past month or so and want to extend these learnings and advice to you all today. So moving on to our topic for today, we'll be discussing application availability and management. A critical area of focus for many of you is ensuring application availability for your users as well as management remotely on your end. So really looking forward to diving into some long and short-term considerations and solutions for that. So a few housekeeping items. We've allocated 45 minutes for today's session, 30 minutes for presentation about, and then a little time at the end for Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to send them to us via the chat application here in WebEx training, and I'll ask on your behalf. Once we wrap up the slides, we will unmute all lines to encourage direct Q&A participation, so please feel free to speak up. You're also welcome to use the raise hand icon in the right-hand panel as well. But chat is the primary way to ask questions at any time, and I'll make sure to pop in real time if it's relevant to the specific slide. And then after today's session, we will get a recorded version of the webinar and slides out to all of you via email. So without further ado, let's move on and meet our experts and presenters today. I'd like to introduce Michael Berger, Bryan McGowan, and Marshall Ashley from the Burwood Consulting team. So they will introduce themselves and then dive right in. Mike, please take it away from here.
Sure, thanks. Hey, welcome everybody. Like Colleen said, my name is Mike Berger. I'm the Cloud Delivery Manager here at Burwood. Been with Burwood for about 9 months now. My responsibilities range from making sure that our customer onboardings in the GCP go flawlessly, as well as overseeing our professional services work with regards to everything from simple consultative work for up to large-scale migrations into the public cloud. Bryan, you want to go?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Bryan McGowan. I'm the Practice Director for Security here at Burwood, and I have spent quite a bit of my career on helping deploy secure applications for users, both web-based and on-premise. My team helps out with all parts of security, so from governance perspective, helping set those objectives and security frameworks and compliance through enabling secure applications, secure remote access, and secure cloud deployments. So happy to be part of the conversation today, and I'll pass it to Marshall.
Awesome. Thanks, Bryan. Yeah, so I'm Marshall Ashley. Same as Mike, I've been here for about 9 months. I'm also in the cloud delivery and DevOps practice, assisting clients within DevOps practices, consultations, as well as application migrations and assessment. So, about it.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So let's go ahead and just dive in. I think we might get to time. So one thing I'd like to encourage is use the question, the chat for questions. You might come up with them now and forget to use them later when we get to the end. So go ahead and put them in while we're talking, and we'll either get to them as we talk if they're important enough, or we'll just hold them to the end. Go ahead and slide to the next slide there, Bryan. Great. So yeah, like Colleen said, we're going to take a look at application availability and management, and go into some short and long-term considerations as you begin thinking about your strategy moving forward. In a post-COVID world where we might need to be working remotely more often. One thing that did come apparent as we were developing this webinar is the fact that each of these topics could easily be put into its own, own webinar, or even some of them into a full or multi-day workshop environment. So we're going to touch on a few high things from a pretty high level, but if there are topics that strike a particular chord with you, please reach out, ask a question, or reach out to us later, and we can have a deeper discussion offline if it needs to be. Like I said, we're going to talk about some short-term, some fast-ish solutions. I had to throw the ish in there because Some of them are fast, but some of them might take a little more time than you need. And long-term solutions, how we look at applications for candidates to migrate to the public cloud. Okay, next. Brian, can you advance slides?
Oh, sorry, I thought we were.
No, sorry. Yeah. Right. So, yeah, too far. One more back. The headline thing. Sorry, we had some technical difficulties, and Brian's driving and I'm talking. So I'm the navigator. He's the driver. So, like it or not, the virus has changed the world we're living in, and it's challenging every organization to embrace remote working. But for many businesses, it's a totally uncharted territory. A lot of organizations will allow a few remote users from here to there, a few work from home days. A lot of the times those work from home days are kind of half work, half not. But this shift to everyone working remote is introducing a whole new level of complexities for everyone, from the C-suite down. It's really had an effect on everybody. C-suite, accounting, engineering, development, all the teams that support all of those people that I mentioned above. Everyone's been impacted by this transition. So in order to understand how the considerations businesses have to take into account when we're going we're going to look into a few overarching considerations that you need to take into account when you're looking at moving your applications. So next. All right. So this is kind of a rhetorical question, but how did your business continuity plan hold up the past few weeks? Were you able to continue business as usual? Were you able to have a few hurdles that were easy to get over? Were you at a dead standstill when all your employees started working remote? Those are the kind of things that you have to think about when you're making a business continuity plan. You don't really even think, did you even take into account, could there be a global pandemic that shuts the entire economy of a country down, and all your workers are going to have to work remotely? I don't think a whole lot of business plans had that. A few might have, but if they did have it, I wonder if they were planned correctly. So like I said, we're gonna provide you some of our thoughts and ideas to help you decide what to look for next time this might happen.
I think it's interesting, Mike, that you say that, because a lot of organizations didn't really view this as a exercise in their business continuity planning.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
It's become clear as this has stretched on that this is definitely something they should have been thinking about, right? So like you said, most continuity plans were focused on, hey, what happens if the data center blows up or the network goes down or the application crashes, but we've learned that this is just as important of a scenario, right?
Yeah, not a pandemic. I've actually been at a place where we took the section about global pandemic out of a business continuity plan because it would never happen. So I'm sure that company is living and learning right now. Anyways, next. Okay, so we're going to jump right into the kind of the short-term things you need to think about. It's pretty obvious when you start looking at your capacity. One of the first things you're going to look at is your network. Can your corporate network handle the increased influx of remote workers? Do you have the bandwidth to sustain all the workers? Is your latency low enough that your application performance is good enough that your employees can be productive? On the other side of that, though, and it's something that you might not think about, does your remote workers, is their network bandwidth high enough? Is their latency good enough to handle that same thing? Your network might be bulletproof, but I guarantee you that your end users on Comcast, I can speak from experience with this one, that their latency has gone up considerably. If I had to rely on an application that was hosted on-prem over VPN, I'd have some serious trouble sometimes the past few weeks. So taking that into account, we have to understand all of the variables in our network in order to fully plan for something like this and be able to successfully navigate this new time.
I'm sorry to interject, but
yeah, go ahead.
I definitely agree. Networks obviously be a huge item, whether remote or not. But with the current climate of things, one thing to also take into account, even with bandwidth usage, is the amount of devices that are going to be on a network, right? So that could be cell phones even now, and depending on VPN connectivity, what's your bandwidth, what's your rate limit. Also, factoring somewhat further down the road, we'll probably go into is your security aspect, right? So, are these employees bringing their own devices, right? What does that look like? Security and bandwidth, is there whitelisting going on as well? It's going to kind of help limit some of those sites in which folks will be able to ask, or is it also a split tunnel? So yeah, definitely a lot of considerations that could go on with your bandwidth and the security.
Not just the employees, the employees network. The other variable that I don't think a lot of people think into it is our kids are all out of school as well. I have multiple children who are doing work at the same time, and they're all watching videos at the time for school, and that's taking up my bandwidth for work. Anyways, next slide.
Yeah, before I switch really quick, the other thing I wanted to point out too was we've seen a big we've seen a lot of organizations learn that they weren't licensed properly. Even if they had the bandwidth, even if they had the equipment, might not have had the right licensing because their licensing was set up to be enabled for what would I call it, leisure remote access, right, or not full access. One of the things we've been really lucky for in this pandemic has been that a whole bunch of the vendors out there have thrown their licensing limits out the window and said, hey, use your VPN to its capacity, use your conferencing solutions, even like you said at home. I know like Xfinity threw the bandwidth caps out for the months of April and March so that you could use it. But those were sort of lucky circumstances. If we're thinking about a more targeted type of outage to a particular organization, they wouldn't have had those niceties. They may have had struggles with, hey, I've got everything I need except licensing, and red tape holds me up from getting the licensing I need, which could definitely be an issue going forward. And I think a lot of organizations will be thinking a lot harder about how well licensed am I, or what's the turnaround time for me to get those licenses if I need them.
Yeah, it actually could shift how businesses do their licensing as well, which could be a good thing for end users too, hopefully. Great. Okay, so next we're going to touch on security and data access. So where is your data? Where is your data? Where are the services that access your data? How do your users access their data? How do you prevent data from exfiltrating your network now that 200 different people are accessing from remote where you might not have seen that before? How do you keep up with in your day-to-day security operations from that? Are you improving how you keep your how you track your data leaving your network? How do you it's basically knowing who, what, where, and why of accessing your data, and ensuring governance rules are being followed. You're actually now securing data over unknown networks as well. You have multiple new people coming on board remotely, and you're not fully aware of what's on their network. So is your data and device, how do you handle data and device compliance? Is your data still compliant, or your data storage compliant rather, sorry, if you are allowing new remote users in? Can you implement a zero trust? Oh, and while I'm thinking about the zero trust network, the QR code on the right side of the screen is actually a link to a webinar that we had earlier in this series by some of our colleagues. It's a really great webinar, so we'll leave the slide up for an extra couple seconds at the end for you all to grab that. It all boils down to how are you protecting your data? Do you have a common platform for user identity, auth and auth to get into defining your data? The compliance thing, again, is, are you still falling under your compliance? Are you PCI compliant? Are you allowing people just randomly into your network now that would be able to get to your compliant data, your encrypted data on your set, and, without the proper authorization?
Yeah, it's funny. I think about, I'm a security guy, right? So I think about risk all the time. And when we think about risk, we have these 4 risk mitigation techniques, right? We have that you can reduce your risk, try to make it smaller, to make it less impactful. You can transfer it. You can find somebody else to take it on for you. You can outsource it or whatever. You can avoid it. You just don't do those practices. The last one is you accept it, right? And that's what a lot of organizations did in the short term for their security needs in this space, is they just accepted, like you said, I'm not going to be able to control the network. I'm not going to be able to control the end device. The unfortunate part is there's this fifth category of risk that people propose sometimes, which is called ignored, which is really I accept the risk, but I don't take any kind of responsibility for it, right? I say, yep, that sucks, but I'm not going to take any responsibility. Ignore is not actually a thing you can do, right? It's like acceptance without ownership.
Exactly.
And I think that's the shift we're going to see a lot of organizations now looking at. Okay, how do I move from that? I accepted this risk, but I have to do something about it. And yeah, it might, DLP considerations, end user protections, device management configurations. I kind of threw all that out the window for 90 days, but I got to come back to it now. I got to own that risk. So how do I own it effectively? And certainly, like you said, the movement in a lot of organizations leverage some BYOD or non-corporate assets. And when that happened, we lost a lot of control. Data went to devices that no longer had all of the proper protections. We may not have had time to device profile. We certainly don't have complete access. Almost everyone who's given out remote access to applications has done it through some sort of a split security tunneling model. So there's potential for those people now to be those remote users to be phished, to be social engineered, to be targets for malware distribution that they maybe wouldn't have been if they were behind the corporate protections. And so reeling that stuff in is important. And I like that you got the zero trust here because, really that's our end game, right, is how do we maybe escape the need for all of those potential or all those potential risks if we can really build a good zero trust model.
Yeah, it's the thinking further down the road than even a year or so. How can we create a network that is secure, but still it allows our end users to fully perform their duties?
Yeah, and really to add on to there too, assuming that it's VPN and we have our secure tools and we're going into compliance, all that sound. The biggest thing here as well is the transparency and adaptation of these practices and policies, right? So, what is the remote work policy, right? How do those policies map into your security outlines and enforcements? And, how transparent is there trainings for these type of policies that the workforce and employees could, understand and use on a daily basis, right? So, having some sort of outline and training policy, I think, in place, with those guidelines is one thing to consider as well, especially when you're architecting whichever solution that's going to be secure for any type of remote work tool.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue to the next slide. Thank you, Marshall.
Yep. Yeah.
I will give you just a couple of seconds if anyone's going to grab that QR, and then we'll flip over.
Perfect. So kind of deviate a little bit from security, but not really, because end user training is an important part of your security practice. Providing the tools and technologies to end users is really only one part of the solution. What you're giving them is only as effective as what they know how to use. You can give them all the tools they want. If they don't know how to use them, they're going to be useless. Basically, what we look at here is the end user experience boils down to people, process, and technologies. If your people don't know how the process works or how the technology works, they're not going to use it. You're not going to have a productive end user workforce. Kind of an example of what I'm talking about. Our security program essentials. The governance sets direction and goals. Our technology supports objectives, enables protection, and then educated users are empowered to access the apps that they need because they have those because they have that education in the background that they need to securely do it.
Yeah, I think it's important. The governance, I always think of it as the thing that gives that end user the instruction, right? Otherwise, we always leave our people to make their best determination of what to do. And I always give everyone the benefit of the doubt, right? No one's trying to purposely do something wrong, but we're always asking an end user then to make their real-time decision about risk in what could be the most risky situation they're in. So the governance really helps them to know, and the education and the awareness, like what should I do? How should I react? How can this go? And it leads into your question about communication and what happens if we don't have good communication? Right now we're really relying on that education, that awareness to make sure that user is going to do what we want, how we want, follow our governance objectives. Right.
And if those objectives aren't set out in front of them, from go, or at least from a point in time, it's really up to us to make that apparent to them.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next.
All right.
Okay, so let's look at some application availability. So what do you have immediately available for your workers? Like I said before, can your infrastructure scale to meet that demand? Another thing to look at, how will that application work over remote access? If it was architected to work on a LAN, where you have a kind of a conditioned network, if you will, how's that going to work if your end user is coming in over a VPN that's got a kind of a dodgy connection anyways? Are they going to have a good end user experience, and are they going to be able to be productive? What % of your applications are currently virtualized on-prem? So are they deployed into like a VMware, or are they in a container? Are they deployed into a Docker container? Those type of questions kind of allow you to think further down the road more strategically of, hey, I have these virtualized already. This would be an easy lift and shift to a public cloud, or this is in a container. We could move it to another, into Kubernetes, and we can move it to GKE, or with little, legwork in the back end to get that moving. So the next thing you got to look at is what applications aren't available, what critical applications aren't available, and how you close that gap. Do you just open them up to all your user base, or do you selectively open them on a request basis and inundate your support staff with new, changing networks and stuff to get to new applications? How do your users connect to the applications? Are they connecting over VPN? Are they using a virtual desktop environment? Are they over SaaS, and do they just not have access? Those are the type of things you need to look at, and there's more, obviously. Like I said, this is very high level, to understand your current availability and what can be done in a short-term manner. So I threw this in here because a lot of the challenges that we're seeing are cultural. Now, the fact that this is in your typical journey, you want to instill a culture of a group that embraces change and looks at change as a challenge, right? Not a group that doesn't embrace change. However, with the environment we're living in now, that was kind of taken care of for us. We were forced to embrace change and thrust into making the changes whether we were ready or not. One thing we should take away from this whole thing is, if remote work and distributed workforce isn't something your organization has embraced in the past, that should probably change. Remote work should be considered as a long-term solution, and applications for the future applications should be architected in a way that the barriers that we're seeing currently aren't in place. But and just basically rethinking back office process and procedure.
Yeah. And, another thing here too, Mike, so I was just thinking as you're going through these, just, what are some of the ways that we could help enable and embrace that culture? I think a lot of the movement from a technology standpoint, really pushing applications and access to cloud, right? So I think that's one area to consider, depending on what applications or tools you're wanting to leverage. That's a way that could help speed up some of that adaptation process and culture balancing there. So I think, yeah, that's going to be a huge step looking forward.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of the culture of change is it's kind of not a cliche term, but a lot of people talk about it. But in times like this, the only thing you have, and that's cliche too, but the only thing you have is change. Everything is changing. But in order to embrace a change, the easiest way to kind of shift a culture into this embracing change is getting small wins up front and getting some confidence and being able to transition applications like this into a remote first type mentality will give us those those small wins up front to kind of improve the culture, improve the appetite for change. Cool. So again, the QR code on the right here is another webinar that was given during the same series where they talked about I think remote work in general. It's a really good webinar. So if you want to dive into that one, that QR code will take you straight to it. So in general, for short-term wins, we're looking at leveraging what you already have in your infrastructure toolbox. Like I said before, if your application is in place, what can you have an application in place? What can you do to expose that application to remote workers? What's the path of least resistance to get to that point? Go ahead if you want to. Yeah. So some of the things we've looked through are using your existing tools like laptops and desktops, remoting in, and also virtualization. So we'll talk about laptops and desktops first. So this is basically what everybody has. Let's go back one more. Sorry. What everybody has right now is currently, you have a VPN. You're utilizing your existing infrastructure to allow your end users in, and they now have access to your entire network. Hopefully not the entire network, but the parts in the network they need. Again, at this point, you might need to expose other parts of the network and other applications to specific users, but that's something you'll have to figure out at that point. You can extend sorry about that. You can extend your access to your corporate network over a wired or wireless connection using like Meraki devices. This is an added expense unless you're doing it already, and it requires some additional expertise. And to me, and Brian might have a different opinion on this, but I think it's a longer time horizon type project to take into account, but it's definitely one of the more secure methods that you can do. Additionally, if you have current on-prem applications like email, or you're using a SAN to store your data, you can look at shifting your on-prem email to Microsoft or Google or somewhere, where you can use your shift some of your storage to cloud-based storage like OneDrive or S3 and Amazon or one of those other providers. Again, so remoting in. This is basically, if you're not really allowing I keep saying customers, I'm sorry guys. You're not allowing your end users to take a physical device home, or you're allowing them not to take a sensitive device home. This is allowing the user in basically to their device specifically, and from there they'll use their applications that they've been using. So this is like Citrix, the Citrix Cloud Control Plane with remote PC access, VMware infrastructure, TeamViewer, or also something like the Microsoft solutions. And we're running out of time, so we're going to breeze through these last few. Again, virtualization. So this is another slightly longer time horizon, but it's also something you can do rather quickly. Moving your desktop infrastructure or laptop infrastructure to a virtualization like Amazon workspaces or desktops in Azure. That allows you still some control over the desktop. It allows you to deploy the desktop you want with the controls and the software that your security demands into a workstation that an end user can get from either their laptop or a tablet in order to continue to be productive. And depending on the connectivity between you and a vendor, your latency could still be, you could still get internal applications on those same devices. Next. So our longer term solutions, we'll go through these kind of quickly. So what we'll talk about, and we'll just slide on to the next one. So what we look at when we're going to, with customers, we're looking at what applications they can deploy into a public cloud. We had this tiered approach. So go to the next slide real quick. So if we're looking at tier one, first thing is the goal of tier one is to gain some quick wins and provide some tangible, immediate benefits to the business. So the first tier, the strong candidates might be, let's see, an application that would be significantly more expensive to run on-prem than in the cloud. Are you looking at hardware refreshes for this application? If that hardware refresh amount is kind of high, it might be worth looking at moving this to a public cloud. Are there services that can make the performance, like a region, like if you could deploy it in a region for an end user that's in that specific region, does that gain you efficiencies and perform slightly better?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry, I thought it was a lag. Yeah, so no, I think, yeah, totally spot on about all that too. So one key thing I think there's a takeaway here is also the scale, right? So you're going to possibly have more workforce that's obviously going to be remote from time to time, and even more so now, right? So what does scaling look like? If you're locked into an on-prem data center or something like that, what are your services and scaling capabilities around that, right? So there's obviously, not going to be a lot of, adding hardware and such like this at a time like this right now. So, possibly you want to move to the cloud, right? So, breaking down costs and things of that nature. So there's certain scaling platforms and tools and features depending on what cloud provider you would go with. But those would be, big considerations, and also that could really maximize your return on investment and efficiency in the workforce too.
Yep. Cool. So go on to slide. Next slide. So the next tier we look at is the minimizing the migration risk. So this is does this application support a critical business function? If it doesn't, it's a better candidate than one that does. Is it like an ETL job that runs at night or at the end of the day? Or is it something that an end user uses from 9 to 5? Can it be migrated past, after 5? Or is it something that can be down for an extended period of time? Are there many dependencies on this application? Does data that comes out of this application flow into another that's more critical? So you have to understand the workflow of each application to understand if application A flows into B, and A is not critical in your mind, but B is, you still have to take into account that A is still not a good candidate because of B. So also take into account what's the production level. Is it a dev application? We can probably take some downtime on that. If it's production, probably not. Do you have proper documentation for the application? Is it something that's well documented? You have architecture diagrams. You have all of your documentation that went along with it. That probably could be a good candidate. If not, you might want to figure all that stuff out before and then start thinking about moving it. Are there any legal or government compliance requirements that say you can or cannot move it? Is there a line of business owners of that application eager to move? Those are just the simple, early things to ask in this tier.
Yeah, I think if I could just tag on, Mike, one of the biggest things we see is compliance pushback. You mentioned the government or legal compliance reasons. Application, sometimes you get that application owner or line of business owner who's excited about it, and then you get a compliance pushback who says, hey, we've got strict requirements about where we store data, how we store data, encryption needs. All those things can lead to the risk that you add on for when you're doing the migration. Now, sometimes those things are answered by a migration too, right? It brought up, if the platform's aging or there's constraints, there's maybe some upside to that too, but it's definitely a consideration when you're thinking about how it's going to flow.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next tier is ease of migration to the public cloud. This goes along with what I said a little while ago. Is it already a virtualized application? Is it a containerized application that's on-prem? That kind of lowers the risk a little bit, but it still makes it a little, could make it a little more difficult. when you plot out this whole map, and just as a side note to this, when you're plotting this out and to which applications to migrate to the cloud, you actually might find some in tier 3 that might go before tier 2, or even 1. And that's absolutely fine. Tier 2 and 3 just both have more variables than tier 1 is really all you look at this point. So slide to the next one real quick.
Oh wait, sorry, I was going to add
oh, sorry, Marshall.
There
yeah.
Too. Sorry, it's okay. Yeah, no, sorry. I think this kind of fits in between tier 3 and 4 in a way, but what I'm going to mention is the fact that what is your delivery pipeline, your build pipeline when you're writing and porting over these applications? Is that different from anything that you would possibly have on-prem, right? So your workflow as far as your source code repositories, your building of such, what type of compliance and any type of considerations that you have as far as approving change requests and such when you're deploying, right? So there's going to be possibly some differences between on-prem and cloud versus doing that. So those are some of the approaches that you probably want to take a little bit more of a consideration in when you're doing it.
Yep. All right, so more than likely, your last migrations are going to be custom applications. And some things to consider when you're looking at your custom applications: was the application built for a specific hardware architecture? Was it specifically built for an on-prem type network, which is going to be slightly faster and less latent than a internet type network? Is your code documented enough? Is it well documented? Can you read the code? Can you tell what it's doing? Is the application intertwined with another application landscape? Most of the time, a custom application was written because 2 applications didn't talk, and now it's kind of an intermediary. And again, do you have the in-house expertise to migrate this application to the cloud successfully? Some of these applications might be apps that were written 10 years ago, maybe in COBOL or something like that. That doesn't lend itself very well to migrating. If you still have that expertise, though, that takes that variable out. That's really all I have for number 4. That's usually the last application level to move to the cloud. I think that's my last slide. Unless somebody has something on this slide. And again, if you have any questions, we can unmute everybody if you have questions you want to ask in person, or if you have questions in the chat, which I don't think we do still yet. If not,
I will throw one plug out there if we don't have any questions, or maybe it's a discussion starter. But I see that, or I've been following that Google's BeyondCorp solution, which was kind of the model for zero trust application delivery. They've just made available as a service now, and I would expect we're going to see more interest in that space, especially as it seems like the perfect confluence right now of this time of we want to get away from network-based remote access if we can. We want to really enable that zero trust. We want to be able to kind of put just-in-time application delivery in front of each person. Are you guys seeing that as a trend of more organizations wanting to achieve that network-less remote access applications?
We have actually had a few of our customers bring up the subject. I don't think they're quite ready for it yet. The customers we're dealing with, most of them are kind of just beginning their cloud journey, but it is something that's on their kind of roadmap for, as a strategic point. And if it's not, we usually bring it up, don't we, Marshall? It's something that we want to kind of instill in a lot of our customers that, in the end, it might be a tougher sell for some of your more seasoned people that want to have that fine-grained control. But in the end, it's understanding the parallels between what you have in place now and what you can have in place with that zero trust type network and BeyondCorp type network, and seeing the strengths of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks, guys. Let me jump in here. Great content so far. We would like to go ahead and unmute all lines. Before we do, if everyone can just make sure if you are in a loud location or have that home background noise, please manually mute yourself. But let's go ahead and unmute all lines right now and see if we have any questions from the group. So I encourage anyone to go ahead and speak up.
I have one question.
Sure.
So most of our users have laptops. The few that don't, we loan them laptops. The question is, we were already considering about going to virtual desktops. What is the advantage of that over kind of our existing setup where everybody takes their laptop home with them?
So one of the biggest advantages to me for virtual, a virtual desktop infrastructure is you are having more control over what your end user can do with it. So basically, you can lock it down so it's going to be like your laptop. You can lock a laptop down to let them not install things or not make no changes, and you can reset it every time. But this allows you to deploy it in a manner that allows you to do the same things, but it also allows you to save costs by shutting it. If they're not using it, it's shut down.
Well, to also add in from a security standpoint, as far as vulnerability and rolling updates, that makes things a whole lot easier, and also saves when we're to lose your device. There's that aspect of it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with you, Marshall. Even the data residency, if back to kind of your initial point, like about data leakage and how do you keep that data safe? Like if you can use a VDI image, you're no longer letting that data leave the perimeter of your environment, your cloud environment in this case. But it's certainly a much easier compliance story too when we look at ways to explain where data is stored, how it's resident, especially if you have to be able to prove access to that data, if it's PCI data, if it's HIPAA data, and you've got users that you want to be able to audit that access. It's much easier if you can retain it on the VDI infrastructure than trying to chase it all the way out to a remote laptop.
Okay. So, we were looking at this like 2 years out, so we hadn't even gotten into the phase of researching the needs. This is kind of forcing us to maybe shorten that time frame considerably. Can you guys give me some sort of formulas for the storage requirements that I might need for, say, 140, 150 users?
Did you say storage requirements? You kind of broke up right there.
Yeah, storage requirements. Okay. How much storage would I need on a particular server or servers?
Well, it depends what type of VDI you're deploying, and I think this is a pretty detailed discussion that we'd have to have. If you're deploying them like on-prem, like as a Citrix type thing, are you talking about in AWS or Azure?
Yeah, Azure or Citrix or something like that. So I guess my question is, there's no easy formula for.
Yeah, I don't know if I would call it there's not a formula. I just don't know it offhand.
Okay.
The fact that you can scale your storage as needed in a VDI solution as well makes well. Let me back up one step. If you're deploying into one of the public cloud VDI platforms, you can scale your backend storage as you need. It's slightly more difficult if you're trying to do something similar on-prem, or I don't know why you would want to, but it's just more cost to you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty in-depth, question, I think. But to add on to the fact that there's different retention periods for also data. It's also are these considerations as far as someone's user workspace, are they being wiped at the end of the day? What's the data? Is there a central location for that? Say if you're doing cloud. But we definitely be able to take this offline if you're interested. To talk more.
Yeah, go one more slide, and I think our contact info is on the next slide. So feel free to reach out to one of us, and we can get you in the right person, or we can just have a discussion too.
Sure. I think you answered my questions.
Okay, cool.
Right.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else.
And gentlemen, I know we're at time, just one more before we wrap that's come in via chat. Regarding that application migration to cloud, does Burwood already have clients that have moved apps to cloud directly as a result of COVID-19, or is that more future talk?
Kind of not out of my group. The migration, we're coming out of my group. The migration wasn't specifically due to COVID-19, but it just so happened to be going on in this time frame. So I don't think we've had any direct projects come out of this out of doing this. I think people are still trying to get their feet underneath them. But yeah, nothing directly due to this yet.
Great. Okay, good. Well, since we are at time, as Mike said, our contact info is here on the screen. Thank you all for joining us today. I encourage you to connect with any of the presenters, Mike, Bryan, or Marshall, or myself, with any questions. Happy to continue this discussion offline. And like I mentioned at the beginning, each of you will receive this recording link and a downloadable copy of the slides via email following the session. And one last note, this is actually the last of our 4 scheduled sessions for the series. We hope to add more, but next week you can each expect to receive a survey from us via email. We're looking to crowdsource some feedback on where everybody is from a technical strategic perspective related to COVID-19 right now, looking to crowdsource some ideas for future sessions so we can make sure they're especially relevant to you and where you are now. So please keep an eye out for that survey early next week and more sessions to come. So with that, I will wrap this up. Thank you all again for joining Burwood and for your questions. Hope you each have a productive and safe day. Thank you.